Hey there, and welcome. Today, we're going to take a whirlwind tour of our amazing planet, exploring Earth's major biomes. We're going on a journey from the super hot equator all the way to the freezing poles to see how life manages to adapt to some really diverse and, honestly, pretty extreme conditions. So let's dive right in. But first, let's kick things off with a simple question. Why can't a polar bear live in a desert? Now, I know, the answer seems totally obvious, right? But the science behind why it's obvious is fascinating. And it all boils down to one core idea, the biome. All right, so since that's the key to our whole question, we've got to know what we're dealing with. What exactly is a biome, anyway? Simply put, a biome is a huge community of plants and animals that are all adapted to live in a specific climate. You can kind of think of the climate, the temperature and the rainfall, as the lead architect. It designs the environment, and that then decides which plants can grow. And of course, the plants then determine which animals can call that place home. It's this whole chain reaction. Okay, with that definition locked in, let's get our global safari started. Our first stop is right near the equator, that belt running around the Earth's middle that gets blasted with the most direct, intense sunlight all year long. And all that powerful, direct sunlight gives us our very first biome, the tropical rainforest. These incredibly green, lush forests are found in this narrow band just wrapped around the middle of the planet. The name of the game here is consistency. It's hot and it's wet pretty much all the time, which creates the perfect conditions for things to grow. This leads to this unbelievably dense vegetation, where all the plants are in this constant, fierce competition for a little patch of sunlight. And with all those plants, there's endless food and shelter, which is why rainforests are absolute hotspots for biodiversity. Okay, now imagine we're taking just a few steps away from the equator, into the zones just on the edge of that rainforest belt. Right away, the climate starts to change, and when the climate changes, well, the whole landscape transforms with it. Welcome to the tropical grassland, probably better known as the savanna. It's still really hot, but here's the big difference. The rain comes in seasons. There's a long, dry season that just stops a dense forest from ever getting established. And what do you get instead? These huge, sweeping plains of grass, which are perfect for supporting the massive herds of animals we all picture. Elephants, giraffes, and of course the predators that hunt them. All right, buckle up, because our journey is about to take a pretty big leap. We're leaving the tropics behind and moving into the mid-latitudes. And here, we're going to find some much, much drier zones, and then some more moderate ones. Our next stop, the hot desert. These biomes tend to show up in these specific bands, north and south of the equator, at certain latitudes. And let me tell you, the conditions here are a world away from the wet tropics we just left. This number right here, this is everything you need to know about this biome. Less than 250 millimeters of rain a year. I mean, to put that in perspective, some rainforests get over 2,000 millimeters. This extreme lack of water dictates literally everything about life here. It makes sense, right? Because it's so hot and dry, there's just not much plant growth. Not enough water to go around. And the animals that do live here, like scorpions and lizards, they are absolute masters of survival, with incredible adaptations to hold on to every single drop of water they can find. Okay, let's move on to a much milder environment, one that probably feels pretty familiar to a lot of you. We're now in the temperate deciduous forests, which you'll find in the mid-latitudes, generally between 40 and 60 degrees. What really defines this place? 4 distinct seasons. We've got mild temperatures and pretty consistent rain, which supports these huge, broad-leaved trees like oaks and maples. The ones that give us those spectacular colors in the fall before they drop their leaves to survive the winter. This rich, constantly changing forest provides tons of food and homes for animals like foxes and squirrels. So check this out. What's really cool is seeing what happens in these exact same latitudes when there's just less rain. It's a perfect side-by-side comparison. On the left, plenty of rain gives you a forest. But what happens when that rainfall number drops way down? And boom, you get a temperate grassland. With only about 250 to 500 millimeters of rain, there just isn't enough water to support a whole forest. So once again, we see it all comes down to water. And this lack of water creates these massive open grasslands that, historically, supported huge herds of grazers, like bison. All right, it is definitely time to put on a jacket. Our journey is now taking us way up into the high-latitude regions of the planet, where things get a whole lot colder. So where are we now? We're entering the Great Coniferous Forest, also known as the taiga. This biome forms this enormous, unbroken belt across North America, Europe, and Asia. And get this, it's the largest land biome on the entire planet. Just massive.
The climate here is cold, and there isn't a ton of precipitation. The star players are the coniferous trees, pines, firs, that sort of thing. You see how they're cone-shaped? That's on purpose. It helps them shrug off all that heavy snow. And their needles are perfectly adapted to save water in the cold, dry air. Because the plant life isn't as varied, you find fewer animal species, but the ones that are here, like black bears and wolves, are perfectly suited for this environment.
Okay, we're pushing even further north now, to the lands that sit just below the polar ice caps. We've just entered the tundra. And the reason for this biome is pretty simple. It's so brutally cold, and the winters are so long and dark, that trees just can't make it here. Period.
You know, in a way, it's basically a cold desert. It gets less than 250 millimeters of precipitation, just like the hot desert. The landscape is completely treeless, covered instead by these hardy, low-to-the-ground mosses, grasses, and shrubs that can just barely hang on. And the wildlife, as you'd expect, is pretty sparse. Just a few highly specialized animals like the Arctic fox and Arctic hare.
And here we are, the final stop on our tour, the most extreme environments on the entire planet, the poles. Found at the very top and bottom of the world, the Arctic and Antarctic, the polar biome is defined by one thing: cold. It's just brutally cold all year long and covered in a permanent or semi-permanent layer of ice. As you can imagine, life here is incredibly scarce, pushed to the absolute limits of survival.
Wow. Okay, so after that trip all the way from the steamy equator to the frozen poles, what's the big takeaway? Let's tie it all together and see the bigger pattern that our journey has shown us.
So here's what it all boils down to. First, climate, and that really means temperature and rainfall, is the main thing that determines what a biome will be. Second, because of that, biomes tend to exist in these predictable bands as you move from the equator to the poles. And third, within each of those bands, every single plant and animal is specially adapted to not just survive, but to thrive in those very specific conditions. And that is why a polar bear, an animal built for the freezing, icy polar biome, could never ever survive in a hot, dry desert.
And that leaves us with one last pretty huge question for you to think about. We've just seen how tightly connected climate and biomes are. So, as our global climate continues to change, how are the boundaries of these great life zones going to shift? How will the maps we've looked at today need to be completely redrawn in the future?